Ethan lived alone on a quiet farm at the edge of a small town. It was a peaceful place with wide fields, tall trees, and long roads that hardly anyone used. His only true companion was his loyal dog Max, a strong brown shepherd who followed him everywhere. Most nights on the farm were calm and silent. Only the wind moved through the dry grass, and the soft sounds of animals far away filled the air. Ethan liked this life. After working all day, he often sat on the wooden porch with Max lying at his feet, enjoying the cool breeze and the soft glow of the moon. The night everything changed began like any other. Ethan finished feeding the animals, checked the gates of the barn, and called Max to come inside. The sky was clear and the moon was bright, spreading silver light across the cold fields. Winter was close, and the air had a sharp bite. But Ethan was used to it. He walked back toward the house, while Max ran in circles, excited for no reason as usual. Ethan smiled and picked up a small piece of wood Max dropped at his feet. He threw it across the yard. Max ran after it with full speed. For a moment, everything felt normal. Then the quiet night broke. At first, it was a soft humming sound. Ethan stopped walking. Max stopped too and turned his head toward the forest behind the farm. The sound was strange. It did not belong to any bird or machine that Ethan knew. It was low at first, almost like a whisper. Then it rose and shook the cold air. Max growled softly. His ears stood tall and his body stiffened. Ethan felt a small shiver run down his spine. He had lived on this land for years. He knew every normal sound. This was not one of them. He grabbed the flashlight from inside the porch and walked toward the noise. Max walked close beside him, no longer playful, but alert and tense. The sound grew louder as Ethan and Max approached the tree line. The temperature felt even colder here, like the air itself was warning them to turn back. Ethan took a deep breath and stepped into the forest. The flashlight beam moved between branches and shadows, lighting patches of snow and fallen leaves. Then Max barked. Not a normal bark. A sharp one. The kind he only made when something felt wrong. Ethan snapped the flashlight toward the direction Max was barking. Something glowed faintly between the trees. At first Ethan thought it was ice reflecting the moonlight. But the glow was moving, soft, weak, and pulsing like a heartbeat. Ethan slowly walked closer. There was a small crater in the snow, as if something had fallen from the sky at high speed. Smoke rose from it, thin and white, and the smell of burnt metal floated in the air. In the center of the crater was a small pod. Ethan had never seen anything like it. It was smooth, silver, and round, with soft blue lines running across its surface. It looked like a tiny escape capsule from a science fiction film. But this was real. Right in front of him, on his quiet farm, Max whined and stepped back, confused but not scared. His tail moved slowly, unsure whether to stay or run. Ethan's heart beat faster. He took a careful step toward the pod. He expected it to be hot, but the cold winter air had cooled it quickly. The pod gave a soft beep, and the blue lines flickered. Then a small door on the side slowly opened with a weak hiss of air. Ethan leaned forward to look inside. His breath caught in his throat. Inside the pod was a little girl, but she was not human. She was small, maybe 8 or 9 years old in size, with pale blue skin that almost looked like frost. Her hair was white, soft, and thin. Her eyes were large and glowing softly like tiny blue lanterns. She wore a thin silver garment that did nothing to protect her from the freezing cold. She was trembling. Her small hands were pressed against her chest, and her breathing was slow and weak. When she lifted her head to look at Ethan, she looked scared but also relieved, as if she had hoped someone would find her. Max stepped forward and sniffed the air. The alien girl flinched. Max immediately lowered his head, sensing she was no threat. He did not bark. He did not growl. He simply looked at her with gentle curiosity. Ethan crouched down, trying to keep his voice calm. He did not know if she could understand English, but he spoke anyway. It's all right. You're safe. The girl opened her mouth, but only a soft sound came out. It was not a word. It was more like a weak breath, mixed with light. She tried again, but her lips were turning blue from the cold. The freezing air was hurting her. Ethan understood one thing clearly. She needed warmth. She needed help. Without thinking twice, he took off his heavy winter coat and wrapped it around her small, shaking body. She let out a tiny sigh of relief, almost like a small child who had finally found comfort. Her glowing eyes dimmed slightly, but she did not look afraid anymore. She looked tired. Ethan lifted her carefully into his arms. She was extremely light. Lighter than a human child. Max walked beside them as they moved away from the crater and back toward the farmhouse. As Ethan walked, he noticed something in the sky. Bright lights moved slowly across the clouds. They were not stars. They were not planes. They were too fast and too controlled. Something was flying above the farm, searching. Ethan felt the girl's small hand tighten around the fabric of his coat as if she sensed the same danger. He whispered softly, "Oh, don't worry. I've got you." Max barked once at the sky, warning whatever was up there to stay away. Ethan reached the house and quickly opened the door. Warm air rushed out, covering both him and the girl. He placed her gently near the fireplace on a soft blanket. Her skin looked less blue now, and her eyes stopped flickering. She curled slightly under the coat, trying to get warmer. Max sat next to her and stayed perfectly still, as if he knew that his warmth and presence might help calm her. Ethan added more wood to the fire and watched as flames brightened the room. The girl slowly raised her hand toward the warmth. A tiny glow appeared above her fingers, like a small floating light. Ethan gasped. It flickered and then disappeared. She was too weak to maintain it. Ethan brought a cup of warm water and held it near her lips. She hesitated at first, then drank slowly. With every sip, her breathing became a little stronger. The color in her face changed from icy blue to a soft, pale tone. She looked at Ethan. Her eyes were full of questions. Fear and hope all at once. She pointed weakly to her chest and whispered a sound that almost formed a word. Leary. Ethan realized it was her name. He touched his own chest and said, "Ethan." She blinked and repeated softly, "Ethan." Her voice was thin like a breeze, but clear enough. Max wagged his tail when she smiled faintly at him. She reached out with a trembling hand and touched Max's head. Max leaned forward gently and let her rest her hand on his fur. Ethan felt something warm in his chest. This small alien child, alone in a strange world, trusted him and his dog more than whatever had been chasing her, but the night was not safe yet. Suddenly, the lights in the sky grew brighter. A distant noise vibrated through the air like engines searching for something. Ethan opened the window just enough to look outside. Several glowing objects moved slowly above the treetops. They were scanning, searching, hunting. Ethan shut the window quickly. He knew those lights were not friendly. They were looking for the girl. They might have been the reason her little pod crashed in the first place. He looked at Leary. She was watching him with wide eyes. She knew the danger too. Ethan kneeled beside her and rested a hand gently on her shoulder. He spoke softly, so she would feel safe. "No one is going to take you. You're safe here." Leary tried to speak but stopped. Instead, she raised her small hand and pointed to the sky with a frightened expression. Ethan shook his head. "You're staying right here. I won't let anyone hurt you." She watched him for a long moment, breathing slowly. Then she nodded. It was a small nod, but full of trust. Max moved closer and laid down next to her, covering her with part of his warm body. Leary touched his fur again, this time with less fear and more comfort. Ethan sat by the fire too, keeping watch. He knew the night was not over. The quiet farm he lived on was no longer just a peaceful place. Something from far away had entered his life. Something innocent. Something worth protecting. The lights in the sky passed over the forest and slowly faded into the distance. Ethan hoped they were gone, but he had a feeling they would return. The girl's escape pod was still outside in the woods, and those who chased her might find it. Leary suddenly leaned forward and placed her hand over Ethan's. A faint glow rose from her skin, warm and gentle. It was her way of saying thank you. Ethan smiled. He did not know how or why she came to Earth. He did not know how big the danger really was. But he knew one thing clearly. She needed him, and he was not going to let her down. The fire burned bright. Max stayed awake with ears pointed toward the door. Leary curled under the coat and closed her eyes at last, trusting the human who had saved her from the cold. But far away in the sky, something else was moving. Something that had not given up the search. Ethan did not know it yet, but the night was only the beginning. The quiet farm had become a place where a human, a dog, and a small alien child would soon stand together against something far beyond anything Ethan had ever imagined. Still, as he watched Leary sleep peacefully, he felt no fear, only determination, because sometimes kindness from one human could challenge the entire galaxy. The next morning arrived slowly on the farm. The sun rose behind the hills with pale orange light, and thin mist covered the ground. Ethan had barely slept. He had stayed beside the fireplace most of the night, watching Leary as she rested under the warm coat. Max also stayed awake for a long time, lying near her side and lifting his head every few minutes to make sure everything was safe. When Leary finally opened her eyes, the glow in them looked stronger than before. She sat up slowly and looked around the room. Her body still seemed weak, but she was no longer freezing. Ethan smiled gently when she noticed him. "Good morning, Leary," he said softly. She blinked twice, then gave a small smile in return. It seemed she understood the greeting, even if she did not know the words. Max wagged his tail and walked closer. Leary reached out to touch him again. Her small hand pressed softly into his warm fur. Max closed his eyes and enjoyed the gentle touch. Ethan felt a small wave of relief. If she felt safe enough to smile and pet Max, and things were getting better, Ethan stood up and warmed a pot of water on the stove. He prepared a simple breakfast, hoping Leary could eat something. When he brought a plate to her, she looked at the food with confusion. She sniffed it carefully and then looked at Ethan for permission. He nodded. Leary took a small bite, then another. Her face softened. She liked it. Ethan felt a warm pride rise in his chest. Taking care of her felt natural. He did not think about how strange or impossible this situation should have been. His farm had always been quiet, but now it had become a place where a small alien child was recovering in his living room. Somehow it felt right, but Ethan also knew danger was still out there after breakfast. He stepped outside to check his surroundings. The cold winter air hit his face as he scanned the sky. Everything looked quiet. No strange lights. No humming noises. The forest behind the house looked still, but Ethan knew the girl's crashed pod was still there. If the ones searching for her found it, they would come straight to the farm. When he walked back inside, Leary was standing near the window. She watched the sky with worry in her eyes. Ethan walked to her side and placed a hand on her shoulder. She looked up at him with a question in her gaze. Ethan understood without needing words. She wanted to know if they were safe. "For now," Ethan said softly. "But we need to be careful," Leary nodded slowly. She then walked toward the fireplace and picked up a small piece of burned wood. When she touched it, faint blue symbols glowed on her skin, like tiny patterns of light. Ethan watched closely. She held the charcoal piece against the floor and drew a simple shape. It looked like a large ship surrounded by smaller ones. Then she drew a small circle near the edge. She pointed to the large ship, then to herself. After that, she pointed to the smaller ships with fear in her eyes. Ethan understood. The big ship was hers. The smaller ones were her attackers. She had escaped from the big ship because the smaller ones attacked it. They were hunting her. Leary then placed her hand on the small circle she had drawn and pointed outside toward the forest. She was trying to say that the attackers were looking for the escape pod she arrived in. Ethan knelt down beside her and spoke in a calm voice. "We can handle this. You're not alone anymore." Leary reached out and gently touched his hand, grateful for his promise. Max barked softly as if agreeing with Ethan. Leary's shoulders relaxed a little. She trusted them. Ethan knew he needed to do something. He could not simply wait for danger to come. He had to prepare the farm. The attackers might not be human, but they would still be searching with machines. He needed to use what he knew best: the land, the barn, the tools, and his experience. He grabbed his jacket and stepped outside again. Leary followed him to the doorway and watched. Ethan walked around the barn, checking fences, tools, and hidden paths. Max ran across the field with alert energy, sniffing the air and the ground. Ethan set up a few simple distractions around the farm. Old metal buckets that would make noise if something touched them. Loose doors that would creak loudly if pushed. He even spread some soft soil near the edge of the field so he could see if anything or anyone had walked across it. Leary watched everything with curious eyes. She seemed surprised that Ethan was preparing so much for her safety. She stepped outside slowly, still wrapped in Ethan's coat. Her small bare feet touched the cold ground, but she did not feel discomfort. Her body seemed to handle the temperature better now. She walked toward Ethan and tugged on his sleeve. Ethan looked at her. She pointed at the field, then at herself, then at him. Ethan smiled because he understood what she wanted. She wanted to help. He shook his head gently. "You need to rest." But Leary shook her head firmly. She stepped forward and placed both hands on the ground. Soft blue light spread across the soil like a shimmer. Ethan watched in awe as symbols formed in the dirt beneath her hands. They were glowing patterns, almost like signals. Leary stood up, and the light faded. Ethan could not understand the symbols, but he could tell she was marking the land in her own way. Maybe it would help her sense danger. Ethan placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Thank you, Leary." She smiled lightly, proud to contribute. Later in the afternoon, clouds began to gather in the sky. A cold wind moved across the fields. Ethan told Leary to stay inside while he prepared the animals for the incoming storm. But Max stayed at her side, refusing to leave her alone. Inside the living room, Leary sat near the window and watched the sky grow darker. She placed her hand on the glass and closed her eyes. A faint glow moved across her skin. She was sensing something far away, something approaching. Suddenly Max growled and ran to the door. Ethan rushed inside. "What is it, boy?" Max barked sharply, and Leary stood up quickly. Her eyes glowed brighter. She pointed outside with urgency. Ethan opened the door and stepped out. At first he did not see anything unusual. The cold wind pushed against his face. Then he heard it. A distant humming sound in the sky. The same sound from last night. The sound that did not belong to anything human. Ethan felt his heart speed up. He looked back at Leary. She was standing in the doorway, shaking her head in fear. She pointed to the sky, then pointed to herself with wide eyes. "I know," Ethan said. "Stay back." The humming grew louder. Ethan could now see small shapes above the clouds. They were not bright like before. They were darker this time, as if trying to hide. 3 small ships circled above the forest, scanning the ground. Ethan's breath turned cold. They were searching for Leary, and they were close. The ships shined thin beams of light downward, scanning the trees. One beam landed directly on the area where Leary's escape pod had crashed. The ships paused, then hovered lower. Ethan knew they had found the pod. He ran back inside. "We need to move," he said to Leary. "They found where you landed." Leary's eyes filled with fear, but she moved quickly. She grabbed Ethan's sleeve, trying to warn him again. Ethan placed a hand on her head. "I'm here. We will keep you safe." Max barked loudly at the door, ready to defend. The humming grew louder. The ships were approaching the farm. Ethan looked around the house, thinking fast. He did not have advanced weapons or strong defenses, but he had things that could confuse and slow down the attackers. He knew the land well. That was his advantage. He led Leary to the back room of the house, opened a hatch that led into a small underground space where he stored tools. It was cramped but safe. "Stay here," he said. "I will draw them away." Leary grabbed his arm tightly, refusing to let go. Her eyes shone with fear and worry. "I'll be fine," Ethan assured her. "Max will stay with you." Max walked into the small room and sat beside her. Leary knelt down and hugged Max's neck. Max stayed still and gave a soft whine to comfort her. Ethan closed the hatch and rushed. Outside, the ships were already lowering above the field. Their lights scanned the house, the barn, the trees. Ethan ran toward the barn, kicking over the metal buckets he had placed earlier. The loud clatter echoed across the field, drawing the attention of the ships. One of them turned and pointed its scanning beam at Ethan. Ethan ducked behind the barn. He grabbed a long metal rod and began hitting the side of the barn hard. The echo bounced far across the land. The ships responded instantly, moving toward the noise. Ethan ran to the far side of the barn, making more noise to confuse them. The ships turned again. He knew they were confused. They expected a clear target, but all they found was sound bouncing around the farm. Then the ground beneath the closest ship flashed softly. Blue light rose from the soil. The ship moved upward, startled. Ethan realized Leary's glowing markings on the ground were reacting to the attackers. Her symbols lit up like a warning trap. The ships hesitated, unsure of what the energy meant. Ethan took the chance to run toward the house. He reached the door just as one of the ships lowered again, this time scanning the roof. Ethan rushed inside and opened the hatch. "Leary, it's time to move," he whispered. Leary stood up quickly. She placed her hands together and created a small glowing orb of light. It floated gently between her palms. Ethan did not know what she planned, but he trusted her. He carried her up the stairs and into the living room. Max followed close behind. Outside, the humming grew stronger. The ships were right above the house. Leary stepped forward and released the glowing orb. It floated through the window and up into the sky. The ships instantly reacted. They pulled away from the house and hovered.